Unlock the past.
Shape the future.
Dive deeper.
Discover more.
Welcome to Artifact
Season 2.
on Al-Ula FM Podcasts.
The sound of Arabia.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we are so lucky to have on Artifact, our podcast. We're thrilled and we welcome Mr. Paul Pacifico, who is a visionary leader in the music industry who joined us here in Saudi Arabia in January 2023 to lead the Saudi Music Commission as its CEO, with a career spanning roles as CEO of UK's Association of Independent Music, also known as AIM, A-I-M, and the Featured Artists Coalition. Paul has been a driving force for independent music, empowering artists and fostering innovation in the sector. He has also served as the founding president of the International Artists Organization and held influential positions with institutions like the English National Ballet and UK Music. Beyond his executive roles, Paul has also been deeply engaged in music education as the associate professor at Berklee College of Music in Valencia, where he continues to inspire the next generation of artists. He has worked with legendary names such as Stevie Wonder and Quincy Jones, advising on music strategy for global bands and, of course, exclusive and executive clients. Now, he leads the charge in building and nurturing Saudi Arabia's music industry. Paul brings a wealth of experience, a global perspective, and a passion for fostering talent. We're so excited to have you on the show today, Mr. Paul. Hello and welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be back on the channel.
Mr. Paul, please tell us about what is your vision for the Saudi music industry, and how do you see it evolving under your leadership?
That's starting with a very big question. I would say at the high level, if you take the helicopter view, I think it's all about understanding the end state and working towards it. And the end state for the music sector here is a thriving and diverse cultural and creative ecosystem that is economically viable and sustainable. So by that, I mean, it's easy to think of music as one thing. It's actually many things. And the difficulty is thinking about them all in harmony, how we think about them all at the same time. So for some people, the priority in music is cultural heritage. For other people, it's innovation and technology, finding the next big music tech play. For others, it's about making a living. It's about whether it's a respectable, sustainable career for, people's kids. As a music commission, we have to look at that whole spectrum of outcomes, that whole spectrum of priorities, to try to balance them and try to see where we can align them and create efficiencies and economies of scale to allow them all to grow at the right pace, in the right way, with the right support.
Amazing. Tell us, sir, when it comes to cultural identity in music, because you told us that one of the priorities that a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders might have is preserving heritage or culture through music. How do you balance the promotion of traditional Saudi music with upcoming contemporary genres?
Again, that's a really good question. I think that music creative practitioners struggle less with that than policymakers. Policymakers need, to identify sectors and subsectors to support and to design programs and initiatives to support them. Creatives just look at the whole landscape and say, I just want to experiment and explore in music. And if you come from a background of traditional folkloric music from any of the 13 regions of the kingdom, then that will be your sort of starting point. If you've grown up, like I did, a lot of my family were in the jazz space. So I grew up listening to a lot of jazz, hearing a lot of jazz. That was maybe my musical starting point, jazz and classical music mostly. And you kind of explore from there. Again, I think there are a couple of different things happening at the same time here. One is a rediscovery of traditional art forms, including folkloric music. The other is an exploration into what is the contemporary voice of Saudi Arabia in music in the context of Vision 2030 and this incredible program of transformation and renewal. Al-Ula is a perfect, I think, example of that. On the one hand, you have Hegra and a celebration of ancient civilizations. On the other hand, you have these wonderful kind of new resorts using high tech, and they're beautiful places to stay and to dwell, and they're with a mind very much on ecotourism. So music, it's a similar thing happening. It's both things at once, but they do harmonize, because I think if you think about what is the voice of a contemporary Saudi voice in this moment of kind of transformation, you really can only think about the future if you know both, I think, where you're coming from, where you are today, and where you dream of being. So I think I see it all as a sort of part of a continuum.
You brought up a point I was planning on asking, but it didn't end up on my list of questions. But now that you brought it up, the role of music in tourism or promoting tourism, what do you see the relationship between music and tourism, or destination attraction, destination management? What do you think music plays in those areas or in those sectors?
Yeah, I think everything these days is about experience. That's a lesson luxury brands have been learning over the last 10 years or so. The actual item that you buy is a result of the experience, not the end in itself. Okay, and it's the same with tourism. So why do you go somewhere? You go there to experience the place and the stuff that's happening there. Music both provides a soundtrack to the place, and it's sort of like if you're watching a movie, the film is entirely driven, in a sense. The mood of a film is entirely driven really by the soundtrack. If you've ever had that experience of watching like a horror movie with a comedy soundtrack, it becomes absurd and silly. It's horrific. The soundtrack gives you that eeriness and that atmosphere.
The emotions.
Exactly. And I think, when you go to a place, the sounds, whether those are the sounds of the nature in a place or the sounds of the local music or people playing beautiful music when you're there, that's a big reason to go. And then you layer on top of that, specific events that might drive a reason to go to a specific location at a particular time. So that could be festivals, events. And I know, to take another example from Alula, whether it's Azimuth as a music festival, or whether it's the kind of roller derby that happens during the season there in the winter, there are all these reasons to go. So I think, and they're all music related. So you've got the kind of atmospheric music, which would be like the soundtrack of the movie. And then you've got those individual songs, the reason to go at a particular point in time. And they attract the people who are making the music, right?
Yeah, so, definitely. They attract world level or world class musicians, people who have sold, records in the millions. And I think they're drawn to places like Al Ula for that kind of uniqueness. And I think, music and sound really do deliver so much when it comes to delivering a unique opportunity. Your film example was great. Imagine going to a mall or to a resort in another country. If they're playing the same music that you were listening to in London or in LA, all of a sudden the uniqueness of that mall or that resort or, whatever you're visiting in that part of the world that you are in, it kind of loses its uniqueness.
Yeah, shopping malls are an interesting example, because it's like you go to a shopping mall and it's all the global brands, and you could just as easily be in Riyadh, LA, London. It doesn't matter where you're on the planet. You've got the same brands, the same stores, the same stock. That's very different from going and having that experience of exploring a souk and discovering local artisans, local traders, local products, sourced locally, ingredients you would never find anywhere else, the sights, the smells, the flavors. That's ultimately, I think, what a lot of people crave. There's an absolutely proper place for, big brands and big chains and all that sort of thing. But when we think about travel, wanting to get somewhere, and we're back to that word experience, it's about something unique, something local, something that surprises and delights.
Amazing. Mr. Paul, we want to know, when it comes to supporting local artists here in Saudi Arabia, what role does the Music Commission play in order to support upcoming or existing well-known artists in the kingdom?
Yeah, good question. Again, you've got a good list of questions there. The Music Commission ultimately is 50% a catalytic entity and 50% a regulatory entity. Mm-hmm. So we're there to help provide the support people need to grow, and we're there also to make sure the market works properly and gives everyone a fair chance, and it's a level playing field. It's sort of like playing a football match, making sure you've got the right rules and you've got a referee that makes sure it's a fair game. Okay, there are specific initiatives that we have to support up-and-coming artists. This week, actually, the streaming platform Spotify have been in Riyadh doing an artist development week, taking a series of Saudi artists with other artists and producers from other parts of the region into Merwaz's studio here in Riyadh, and they've been writing songs, recording, also doing the business side, looking at marketing and release plans. So there are lots of initiatives like that we engage with and support. We also, last year, did the first pilot initiatives to take contemporary Saudi artists overseas to showcase and put them on the map internationally. We did that in Los Angeles, in New York, and in Singapore last year, and we're hoping to do more of that going forward. And we have a bunch of other programs, particularly driven out of the Saudi music hubs, that are around both amateur and professional learning for all ages. So there's a real focus on lifelong learning, on practitioner-led skills. There is the whole academic and schools part of it, but if you're asking about artists in the community, I'm a big believer in practitioner-led learning, lifelong learning, and it being in the community, for the community, and really by the community.
So when it comes to supporting that community, are you essentially building them an ecosystem, or are you finding them existing ecosystems, or is it a little bit of both, or is it neither? Are you kind of enabling that ecosystem to exist and then finding the correct gaps in that ecosystem and filling them up with, for instance, potential Saudi artists? Or do you have a group of Saudi artists and you get them training? And so how does that work? Because a lot of people ask about, if I was to become a musician, if I wanted a career in music, I'm sure I have to start with the music commission somehow. Like that would be my natural sure, gateway into this industry.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say to anybody that's passionate about music, definitely reach out and engage with the Music Commission, because we can help map the sector for you, identify what your starting point would be, what your next step might be. I'd say it's kind of a mix of all the things you've listed. We are a catalytic entity, and I say this to my team every day. We have to foster the sector, not become the sector. So, for this to be sustainable, we have to kickstart a load of things. Then we have to support local Saudi businesses to step in and grow, as well as, international investors. And really, my view is that you have to have a garden with many flowers blooming, to have the diversity of opportunity, the choice there for, also, you don't have to be a musician to get into music. There are many professions in music that require skill sets.
Absolutely, I didn't even consider that. So when you were talking about like the business side and the investor side, it didn't even come to my mind. I always just thought like music commission must be like just for the individual artist. I never thought about what role it must play in the business sector.
Absolutely. So, software engineers are needed in music as much as instrument makers, as much as, specialist lawyers, specialist accountants, sound engineers, logistics, project management, all of the roles in any sector have their equivalent in the music industry. So if you're passionate about music and you've got whatever your skill set is, there's a role, there's a job. A lot of those jobs are only just starting here. So the opportunity is enormous, and the excitement of being able to come to a place in the world that has such a long, deep historical connection with music, but very little in the sense of the structured sector. I mean, that's a unique opportunity that I think is really there for anybody to grasp.
So you took my question about the opportunities, and thank you for answering it, Mr. Paul. But I really want to know, when it comes to Saudi music and the demand for Saudi music outside of Saudi Arabia, do you see, an international audience? Whether, is there a growing international audience? Is there some sparked interest in an international audience? Does Saudi Arabian music have potential to fulfill the needs of an international audience or listener base?
I think it really does. And there's a couple of, I'll just explain why I have such optimism. It's not false hope. It's underpinned as everything that we try and do with data. So over the last few years, we've seen a trend in music, which the former chief economist of Spotify named globalization. There was a concern when global streaming platforms emerged that everything would become homogenous, that you'd have 12, 20 global artists that would dominate every chart on the planet. That hasn't really actually happened. What's happened is if you look at any country's streaming chart where people have got the freedom to listen to all music of all time on the planet that they want, on demand, what happens is most of those markets, the top 20, top 10, top 20 tracks end up being around 50% global and 50% local. So you do have your global superstars, of course, but you also have local artists who succeed, who thrive in the global streaming market, but not only in their local territory. In the UK, for example, every UK artist, for UK artists, every stream they get from the UK, it's estimated that they get a further 4 streams from overseas. So you have this network effect that happens in global markets. So a further element to this is the porousness of language and national barriers now. So 20 years ago, we really wouldn't have been talking about genres from multiple nationalities and also genres from in multiple languages. So to think about K-pop, Afrobeat, Amapiano, these are all genres, movements that grew up out of, local scenes, whether it's, whichever continent, Latin America, Africa, Asia, that took over the global market. Well, there hasn't really been a movement like that that's come out of the Arab world, and I believe it really could come from Saudi. In addition, you have rhythms and melodies and instruments here that really haven't been heard on a global stage yet, but that's happening quite quickly. And then the final point I would make is that it's kind of starting to happen. You see the green shoots. There are artists like Michal Tamar, who's on tour at the moment supporting One Republic, touring all over the world. First ever Saudi artist to showcase at the Great Escape Festival in the UK, which is a big showcase festival there, and also did a headline show in London at the same time. We saw the artist Laughter, who's a British artist who came over as our pilot artist in residence at the Music Hub, recorded a whole album actually that was put out on Middle Beast Records. One of the tracks a couple of weeks ago was the BBC introducing Track of the Week on One Extra, which is their kind of cool radio station. And, that's Saudi artists. So you have Saudi artists on the radio in London. You've got Saudi artists touring the world and co-writing with amazing American stars. You've got this recognition starting to happen. And then on top of that, we've had the opportunity, thanks to His Highness our Minister, to start touring the National Orchestra and Choir to various locations around the world and really position traditional Saudi music on the great stages of the world with collaborations with the great cultural institutions of the world. So, for example, in London recently, we were working with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, et cetera, et cetera. All of this combined, you've got access to the digital global market. You've got porousness of language and consumer tastes becoming more diverse. You've got Saudi artists in the contemporary sphere showing they're actually doing it, and traditional culture also taking its place in the great kind of cultural conversation globally. So all of that to me, and my apologies for a very long answer,
no, it's excellent.
All of that to me points to opportunity, possibility, potential, and the data to double down on the investment to make it happen.
And there's a national agenda. So there's government support to make this happen. And of course, we have you. We have the Mr. Paul Pacifico. So if reggae can make it, I always like, when people ask me about, does Saudi music ever have like a potential, as you know, we're radio hosts. So people ask us all the time about Saudi music since we are working in Saudi Arabia. Reggae, which is from a very small island nation, a couple of island nations in the Caribbean. I started out as, spiritual hymn music, made it all over the world. Then I'm sure, music like Saudi music, which is in the crossroads of the planet, could make it at least as much as reggae, if not more. I mean, reggae, what a huge success story. Reggae put countries on the map.
Or more recently, reggaeton.
Yes, reggaeton.
All music starts somewhere.
Yes.
And whether it's, people rapping in block parties in New York in the late 70s, whether it's, the great musicians in Kingston and the other towns in Jamaica that evolved ska into reggae, whether it's, blues coming from the southern United States at the turn of the last century, whatever it is, all music started somewhere. And all music has that moment where it can cross over. And I believe Saudi music does too, absolutely.
So you talked a lot about the potential and the future vision, and it's very easy to understand and to foresee or forecast that kind of success for Saudi music. But I'm sure there's some challenges. Mr. Paul. There's some challenges that are facing, you know what I'm saying, you or, you know, the Music Commission, or there's some challenges facing the sector, the industry, the interest, the art of music in Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. You know, I wouldn't sugarcoat it. Music is a tough game. It's a tough industry. It's highly aspirational. A lot of people would love to succeed in music. Lots of people want to be professional footballers or astronauts. There are very few, actually, of the number that want to give it a go, there are very few that would succeed. So in Saudi, there are going to be the same challenges there are everywhere. You know, when I was a kid, you know, were my parents thrilled to think that I wanted to be a professional musician? You know, there were safer ways to make a living. So they sort of had a lot of family pressure to go into...
I think only the children of musicians are actually encouraged to become...
No, listen, I come from a music family and they were very much discouraging me from going into music. Yeah, they were like, come on, go and there's an easier way to make a living. So I did, you know, nearly a decade in banking and strategy consultancy in the UK before I kind of said, you know, this isn't really what I wanted to do. And I set up a music business and found my way back into the creative side. So there are lots of challenges that are universal, whether those are family pressures, whether those are, you know, the insecurity of making a success of yourself as a creator, all of those things in lots of creative fields. Some of those are even more so or more intense here in Saudi Arabia because of the cultural context. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and to work through it, you know, with families and help support not just kids that want to have a career in music, but support their families to understand what are the real opportunities, what's the sensible way to go about this.
What's the potential?
What are we doing really? And the other thing I think to highlight is, if you don't ultimately succeed in becoming the most famous, you know, insert genre of music performer in the world, I think we overlook the transferable skills that are learned on that journey and that can be applied to many other careers. And particularly as we go into, a world that is facing incredible challenges around, you know, the advent of AI, quantum computing, all the other things that are ahead of us. What are the jobs of tomorrow? What are the skills that young people need to thrive in the workplace of tomorrow? Well, I would argue that a lot of those skills come from a background in creative endeavor. So whether it's teamwork, lateral thinking, problem solving, you know, coming up with a creative solution that is unexpected, a lot of those things come from, you know, slogging your way through trying to succeed as an artist in the music industry. It teaches you a lot of that stuff and a lot of resilience. All of those are the skills I hear governments saying kids need, or they need to help kids foster for that next generation of work. So that's number one. Number two is the number of other jobs in the music sector that we've already touched on. And then number three, yes, there are specific challenges here in Saudi. It's an early stage market for music. There's huge pent up demand. We know the Saudi public is very culturally curious.
Look at the concerts.
Absolutely. We know there's huge pent up, so demand and supply. We know there's lots of talent here. I mean, the talent I meet on a daily basis is incredible. What we're lacking is many of the enablers, many of the structures needed to really solidify the sector, get the money flowing, get it really working properly, the regulation needed, the proper licensing that strikes a balance between, less regulation leads to faster growth, but more regulation leads to a more secure market and a more well-regulated, well-run market. Well, there's a balance to strike there. There are trade-offs. Our job is, as a catalytic entity, to push for the maximum growth possible, as a regulator to make it the healthiest possible growth. But with a blank sheet of paper in the 21st century, we can do what mature music markets can't do. If you're in London or LA or New York, you have to break something old to make something new. Here, we can just build
something new, of course.
So we have a creative and commercial opportunity here that I would say is second to none globally right now.
You brought up machine learning and AI. And I always like to ask the people who are in the creative and art world, what do they think about the role of AI in their industry? First of all, Mr. Paul, is music created by a machine really music?
So, I mean, that's a philosophical question more than a practical one, I would say, for a number of reasons.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, I'm absolutely into tech. I was one of the project team with an amazing artist called Imogen Heap, who released the first ever commercial track on the blockchain. We did that with the Ethereum rollout team some years ago, 2015, I think it was. So really early in kind of blockchain days. AI is present already in many tools that musicians use. And technology, a lot of music genres and waves have been driven by technology anyway, whether it was the invention of the piano or the synthesizer or, different effects units or different, computer software programs that we use in music all the time. Now, much of the software we use in music makes use of AI already. So if you're talking about the use of AI to support creators being faster, more efficient, better creators, yes, absolutely, that's already happening and it will improve and improve. If the question is about generative AI and you sort of just, put a sort of couple of prompts into a search engine and it spits out a track 30 seconds later, I think the technology at the moment is pretty good for highly quantized, by which I mean sort of very regular electronic music. So stuff that's kind of, what would say, 4 to the floor, kind of pretty basic, simple stuff. Sure, it can do it. A lot of background music and beds, those things, I think generative AI can do quite a good job. One thing AI can't do yet, and let's watch this space, never say never, is feel. There's something in flamenco, there's something that I think flamenco artists call duende, which is this idea of spirit. The idea of when a spirit takes over a group of musicians or a performance or a moment, it's that moment of inspiration.
There's a Saudi version in Khabeti and in Khabeti and in Samri. They have the same, I've heard of the same concept where they kind of like, they all know almost like there's an energy in between them that lets them, that communicates between them to tell them this is the percussion beat that we want. This is the mood that we want.
Yeah.
I understand. I completely understand that.
So American music, they call it the pocket.
Yes.
Being in the pocket, it's a very difficult thing to explain to non-musicians, but it's a beautiful experience.
Yes, it's like flow, kind of.
It's being in a flow state, but being in a community of flow state people that are all flowing in their own way, but intersecting, aligning, and harmonizing with each other. It's an incredible experience that music does. Music impacts human beings in ways that we don't fully understand. Interestingly, music, I think, is the only activity that humans can undertake where, if you not to make it very morbid, but if you do a post-mortem and you look at somebody's brain, you can tell if that person has played music because the brain, the bridge between the two hemispheres of the brain actually thickens when you practice music. It takes about a year. After a year, with the naked eye, from the shape of the brain, you could tell whether someone is a musician.
Wow.
Which is extraordinary.
It is.
Physically, emotionally, there's stuff that music does that we don't fully understand, but we know it makes us feel great. We know that there are many flavors of music as there are flavors of emotion, and that music can help uplift us. It can help reassure us.
Motivate us.
And, in the context of what's happening here in the kingdom, I mean, I talk a lot about the fact that music both pushes the envelope of change, but also provides a source of comfort and community cohesion.
Yes.
So, music has many moods. And again, I think coming back to generative AI, what music isn't very good at is some of the simple things that make us feel. If you ask a generative AI tool, and this is my challenge to you, if you're going to do this, get it to make some electronic 4 to the floor music, fine, it'll do it. Then ask it to compose a very, very simple 12-bar blues. And it's awful because it doesn't feel right. And again, I'm not resistant to the fact that AI is improving massively quickly and these things will change. But I do wonder that ultimately we as human beings, that sense of community that music brings will be able to be replicated in AI fully, or whether the act of making music together will perpetuate its need for the human touch. And just one final thought on that. It's very interesting to me that young people in London, every time people have said jazz is dead, the era of jazz is over, it's kind of done. Jazz is complicated. You need to be a virtuoso musician. It's incredibly challenging and taxing to play and play well. And yet this whole new wave of jazz musicians erupted out of London over the last sort of 10, 15 years when they didn't need to. There's so much music that's so much easier to make. So why jazz? It's, and I think there is this sense of human challenge and endeavor and looking for the beauty and the complexity in things. So I don't know. I love the tech stuff. It's great. Let's see where it goes. But I'm a big believer in the humanity in the thing.
And so tell us about the future of the music industry in Saudi Arabia. What are some of your, collaborative models? Who are you working with? Recently announced the induction of your jazz program into the global jazz network.
Yeah, that was a really lovely moment actually to have. We did a pilot Riyadh International Jazz Festival in February this year, and to have
We covered it.
yes, I know.
Shaka
I
Khan
remember.
was there. Yes,
Yeah,
we covered
indeed,
it, yes.
indeed. That's where we spoke last time, I think, and to have that festival recognised by that global network of its peers to enable it to take its place there, I think was a really important piece of reassurance and a moment here in the Saudi sector as it's still early days to say, yeah, do you know what? We do have a role to play. We do have a voice. We do have something to say, and we are recognised by our peers around the world now. And that's happening across the board. So, the other big announcement this year was our partnership with the Recording Academy for the Grammys in the US. So to have to be working together on a MENA Grammys and what that might mean. Yes, there are more and more of these global bodies recognizing our work, recognizing the place of Saudi and the Saudi voice and Saudi talent in that
Saudi
global
potential,
framework.
yes.
Yeah, so in December, we're hosting the first Riyadh Music Week, and that will bridge the week between XP, the Middle East Festival and conference, and Soundstorm Festival.
Yes.
And we'll be hosting a Global Music Makers Summit, the Music Cities Convention. There's a lot of policy stuff, but also all the small venues of Riyadh will light up with music. There'll be the Billboard Arabia Awards. There'll be a whole bunch of activities happening for consumers, for policymakers, and we've got all of the main international music bodies. For all the different stakeholders across the sector will be in Riyadh for that. So again, we're starting to see this pivot. All the main platforms, all the digital platforms, all the big international companies, lots of artists, lots of the musicians' representative organisations, collective management, the sort of back office, the engineering, if you like, room of the music sector. They're all going to be here, and that's because we're starting to break through the waves, break through the surface and be seen and be heard. And we're being received so far, and long may it continue in the right way.
Amazing. And I wanted to know, so, when it comes to jazz, you previously mentioned that, jazz, a lot of people say, maybe wrongfully so, that jazz is a dying, genre and, what's the use in promoting, or why did you stand behind jazz for this experiment that you did for the Riyadh Jazz Festival? Why did you think jazz was the appropriate genre?
I think jazz is very porous as a genre. So, jazz has lots of elements and influences from lots of different cultures around the world. And there is a very long tradition of Arabic jazz. It's a little bit under-celebrated, to be honest. So we did want to take the opportunity to celebrate Arabic jazz, and each night there was a local artist. Two of them were Saudi, one was Bahraini, who performed on the main stage. That was fantastic to do.
Yes, they're a great brand.
And, over and above that, jazz in its essence is a kind of musical conversation. And I think so much of what we're doing is about cross-cultural dialogue. Jazz as a genre really lends itself to that. So it felt like a natural place to start. Also, it is about virtuoso playing. So to show Arabic musicians participating in that highly skilled way of playing, I think is, it's a bit of an opportunity for us. I wouldn't say to show off.
Absolutely it is, because I understand. I mean, if you can deliver on, shooting at the moon, and then you could gather all the stars, the jazz when I was there, I didn't realize that many people were into jazz, to be quite frank. I was delightfully surprised that people are still into jazz, and many Saudis are into jazz. It wasn't just a Western audience. I was shocked to see how many, of the local community was there, engaged. They know the artists, they know the songs, and they were all, I was sitting in the front row, thanks to you, and I was looking back, and people were very, very, very engaged. People they were loving it. And I said, if they can make jazz a thing in Saudi Arabia, then they can make anything a thing in Saudi Arabia.
I think it's interesting because I think many of the artists were unknown to the audience. But one thing that gave us confidence is we saw some data back to the data, we saw some data recently that showed that the Saudi public is 3.1 times more likely than their US counterparts to actively lean into music discovery. And we see this across multiple platforms. We see it on Shazam, we see it on Spotify, we see it on YouTube, we see it across the piece, right? That this data underpins the idea that the Saudi population is culturally curious.
Yes.
So, you know, whether you go to a jazz festival, we did an opera festival equally sold out, and then you see these enormous, you know, endeavors like Soundstorm or like Azimuth up in Alula, and it's extraordinary. The appetite to explore and experience is here, and that gives us confidence to say, well, if you've got a young Saudi population trying to figure out how to express their voice in music on the world stage, I reckon give them the broadest possible palette of colours and let them paint their own picture.
For our second to last question, Mr. Paul, tell us, the Music Commission, how does it engage and, you know, cultivate audiences for different genres? Is that really something that the Music Commission is really interested in doing? Is that one of its mandates? Is your job also not only to cultivate, you know, the business or regulatory ecosystem for musicians and music, you know, leaning industries or, you know, investments? Do you also work on the consumer side? Are you there promoting more consumption of music? Are you promoting the health benefits of listening to music? Are you also a spokesperson for music in general?
Yes, definitely. We have an advocacy team within the Commission, which is effectively advocating for the benefits of music. We've touched on some of them. I mean, some of them that we haven't mentioned are things like music therapy, you know, and by which I don't mean just, you know, I love a sound bath and things like that, but they are to probably, the analogy would be the difference between massage and physiotherapy.
Yes.
So we're talking about actual, you know, prescribed therapy using music that has tangible and quantifiable clinical benefits to, for example, elderly people with dementia and Alzheimer's, young people with autism spectrum disorder.
Like we see in the movies, you know, you see the old man or the old lady, all of a sudden they hear a song they were listening to when they were young, and they become themselves for a few moments. Yes.
These are, you know, these are very real, you know, consequences for the use of music in therapy. And you know, I'm respectful and sensitive to the fact that there are taboos in this region around some aspects of music and music in general. We need to work with people, with families in the community to help tell the story of the benefits of music, to help show how music can add value to people's lives, whether it's, you know, emotionally, physically, you know, engaging with music. You know, I mean, it's not for nothing that people, you know, every gym you go to has music pumping, you know, and whether it's spinning or aerobics or whatever else it might be, you know, people are using music to activate themselves, also to comfort themselves. Many cultures around the world use music when communities come together to mark special occasions, whether those are celebratory, whether they're weddings, whether they're
funerary,
exactly. You know, most major landmark moments in community and life have music that accompanies them, and this is why it brings people together. It allows for I would say, a sense of communion in the context of coming together as a community.
Yes,
it doesn't need words.
Yes, like a sense of ceremony, like the national anthem. If you heard the melody of the national anthem, you know that this is a very significant moment that we all need to respect.
Absolutely.
It's a part of national protocol. When countries' leaders visit each other, there's some sort of...
Yeah, and words can be clumsy in those moments, finding the right words that say exactly what you mean, whereas music can have, they call it actually, academics call it floating intentionality.
Wow.
There's a sort of slightly vague sense. We all agree, we all know what it means, but we don't have to use words and then disagree. We can just generally agree we're all in the right zone.
Yes.
And that happens a lot with music.
Yes. There seems to be too much controversy when it comes to the details in music, like there are in many other sectors, like there is in art or poetry.
Maybe, but this is where music is such a great, you know, tool for bringing people from different cultures together.
Also, maybe it's even more proof that it's a part of our evolution. Maybe music is a part of our evolutionary biology. I'm sure you have much more information about this.
There is more and more research. In fact, in 2022 and 2023, I think, no, 21, 22, there were a number of new papers scientific papers published around the role of music in evolutionary biology, and there's more and more evidence to show sort of things around parent-infant singing, even cross-culturally. Emotional encoding in music is something that we don't lose as adults. So again, all of these things point to an evolutionary basis for music, which would explain why it is so universal across human cultures.
You know, I'd never thought about the whole cooing and lullabying, that being a part of music, but obviously it is. I mean, the whole idea that, in fact, you know, music may as well be considered a part of our biological evolution is, as you said, you know, the global attraction towards music, and also to see how organized music, or, you know, the use of music to show some sort of form of prosperity, and we see it in power, like there's war chants, and there's, you know, like it's used to sound off a feast. I mean, you can see even the ancient applications of music, not need to, you know, really imagine rap or, you know, folk music or hip hop or country music like we think about it today. You could even imagine what were the practical applications of music in antiquity. And I don't think you have to be a historian to imagine what those might have been.
Yeah, I think humans are, humans are humans everywhere on the planet and across time. And I think, you know, we use music very much for similar ideas and purposes as our ancestors. The technology's changed, the instruments have changed. You know, they didn't have amplifiers and PA systems. We do, and other stuff like that. But in general, I think music performs many similar functions in society as it always has.
But even with this technology, there's still some mysteries about some of the musics they used to use, some of the musical instruments they used to use in antiquity. So because we're not using, you know, the same exact materials, or we don't know the melodies, but even that is kind of magical in a sense. Like, even though we have all this knowledge and we imagine ourselves as being so superior, we might not be able to ever hear the sound of a Babylonian harp, for instance. Like, it might have sounded like
maybe it may be a good thing. No,
yeah, I'm just saying, perhaps. No, we never. Will we ever?
I think, one of the things I love that we're doing, we're obviously doing a lot of work under the Saudi Truk program with the Saudi Heritage Preservation Society and with some colleagues at the Theatre and Performing Arts Commission and others, where we're looking at documenting the intangible cultural heritage of the kingdom really for the first time in all 13 regions. And there's huge interest in looking at some of the traditional instruments. So take, for example, rababa. So rababa is a beautiful instrument, but it's very difficult to integrate in a contemporary setting because it doesn't have standard tuning. So you couldn't put it in an orchestra and have it play along easily because they're tuned to the desert. They're tuned to what you had around you. They're not tuned to violins and cellos. So again, we're looking at and experimenting with ideas, and the National Orchestra actually, some of the musicians in the National Orchestra are very involved in this, looking at how would you bring it into the 21st century with a total regard and respect for the authenticity of the tradition, but a way that can be used today and integrated with modern orchestras. So I love that.
It's so context-based, the rubaba. I mean, the example that you gave us, you really, if you take it out of context, it really doesn't make, I don't think it makes much sense to
Sure, but no, music is all about context. So we go back to we talked about horror films and soundtracks before. It's all about context. So whether it's rababa or sensimilla or oud or kanun or ney, all these beautiful instruments have a context. And the lovely thing, though, is the sound of them connects you to the context. So you can be far away and you hear the sounds of home and you're transported. It's like smelling your mother's cooking. It suddenly transports you to a deep memory. Music can do that too.
I completely agree. Finally, Mr. Paul, we want to thank you for your time, but we really want to know, what do you envision the future of the Saudi music landscape looking like in the future? What's your vision?
My vision is for music and its practitioners to have the opportunity to live up to their potential here. And I think that means it's actually very relevant to all of the three pillars of Vision 2030 in terms of, the economic pillar, social pillar, and the national pillar. I think they are utterly relevant to music. I think having a population that has the self-confidence in its history to be proud of standing on the shoulders of the generations that came before, but also finding their own voice in this moment in time and projecting forward. So I think it's all of those things, and having that choice of pathways and opportunities that enable people to make their decisions, find their way, and find their voice.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Paul Pacifico, the CEO of the Saudi Music Commission. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks for tuning in to Artifact
Season 2.
on Al Ula FM podcast.
The sound of Arabia.